Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Maritza is doing this amazing series where she takes three thinkers and one theme. She chooses the theme very carefully and she chooses the thinkers very carefully. I think going back and forth between the thinkers and comes up with a list of three people whom it would be really interesting to compare. And so what do we have? What do you have for us today, Maritza? You're on mute.
Oops, I was trying to follow my own rule and be muted if I wasn't speaking. So today we're looking at how communication shapes culture, and we're going to do this through the lens of Walter Ong, Marshall McLuhan, and Clifford Geertz. We have collectively here previously done several discussions on Walter Ong and Marshall McLuhan. We're introducing Geertz to you so that we can have something new to compare today. So Shrikant, I do have, like I said, I have a couple little slides, just very high level to start us off. And what we have been doing in the past that has worked very nice for us here are in our triangulating three events. We start off by giving you a little bit of definitions, and then we'll get into the heart of comparing, contrasting, and we invite anyone who knows has a profound knowledge on either of these thinkers. We welcome you to chime in. And I always like to preface this by telling you all, please don't expect expert level knowledge from me. I don't have any of that. I am a learner, just like most of us here today. So if you think you have a deeper understanding of something, please, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't be shy. We in 52 Living Ideas, the way that you show that you would like to make a comment or chime in is we invite you to type an exclamation mark in the chat box, and then we call on you when we open it up to questions or comments, as it were. First, let's get started here with a little descriptor for what we're about to discuss. Oops. Share the screen. Oh, wait, I did that wrong. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can you, no, it's not. Okay, give me a second here. I gotta fix something really fast and then I will be ready to share this over. Okay, all right, sorry about that. Now, all set. You guys should be seeing.
Yep.
Fantastic. Okay, so I just didn't want to, I had so much written, but then I was like, oh, I'm going to bore them with way too many words before we get started. So I just pulled out the very top level things. For culture, there's similarities, there's differences between the three. So Walter Ong is deeply influenced by his studies on linguistics and literature and philosophy. And he's looking through, the lens of communication, and he's saying that, he's characterizing culture through the prism of its predominant communication technologies. So his concept of culture is very much about the collective memory and psyche of a people as shaped by their primary means of communication. So he's saying that in societies dominated by oral traditions, culture is a living process of performative storytelling and communal participation. And then in contrast, literate cultures have a culture that is shaped by the analytical detachment that writing introduces. And this detachment emphasizes a historical consciousness and fosters a sense of objectivity and individualism. Marshall McLuhan was actually a communications theorist and a media ecologist, right? So he viewed culture largely in terms of the effects of media on human sensibilities and social structures. He didn't specifically provide one single static definition of culture, but he did imply that it is a complex pattern of interactions shaped by our tools and technologies of communication. To him, culture is an extension of ourselves through various mediums. And each of these mediums has its own intrinsic effects on our societal organization through processes and sensory life. His idea of, the medium is the message, which is, his big, most famous statement. This encapsulates his view that culture is not merely a collection of messages, but the result of the interplay between our senses and the mediums that engage them. So Clifford Geertz he's a little bit more modern here, and he defined culture as a system of inherited conceptions expressed in symbolic forms by means of which men communicate, perpetuate, and develop their knowledge about and attitudes toward life. To him, culture is a shared web of meanings and symbols within which humans live. It's a context, something which can be intelligibly described. His view is that culture is not a power, something to which social events, behaviors, institutions, or processes can be causally attributed. He believes that it is a context, something within which they can be, I'm sorry, I did say that right, something within which they can be intelligently described. Now, how do these three thinkers look at communication? So Walter Ong, his work revolves around the idea that communication is shaped by the medium through which it occurs, right? So he's differentiating, and he does this, he's consistent in his differentiation between oral culture and literate culture. And so he's stating that in oral cultures, communication is situational, participatory, and closely tied to the mnemonic. Whereas in literate cultures, communication becomes more abstract, analytical, and detached, as it's influenced by the introspective nature of writing. He sees the evolution of communication as being deeply intertwined with the evolution of consciousness and society. So, with Marshall McLuhan, we look again at, his phrase, the medium is the message. And this is highlighting that the channel of communication plays a critical role in shaping the nature of the communication itself. He defines communication broadly as an extension of the human senses and faculties through technology, where each medium, and when we say medium, we're talking spoken word, printed text, electronic signals, and etc. And he's saying that each medium has its own intrinsic effects on human cognition and social organization. McLuhan's communication is about the effects of media on individuals and societies, with an emphasis on the technological aspects of media. For Geertz, communication is the transmission of meaning through symbols. His work in anthropology leads him to define communication as a symbolic process through which social interactions and cultural expressions are given significance. In his view, communication is not just about exchanging information, but it's actually about interpreting he's coined a phrase called thick description of cultural texts. He considers the act of communication to be essential in the creation and perpetuation of culture, as it allows for the continuous exchange and reinterpretation of meanings. And I know that we're looking here at, communication, how it shapes culture, but all three of them do talk about metaphor. So I just felt that I had to also provide you with a quick overview on how they define metaphor. So Walter Ong's work, it doesn't actually provide a direct definition of metaphor, but he does explore its role in thought and language, especially in contrast between oral and literate cultures. In his view, metaphor is a natural part of human cognition and a fundamental expression of the way humans conceptualize and make sense of the world. For Ong, metaphors are more pronounced and vital in oral cultures, where the knowledge is more situational and participatory. And that's as compared to literate cultures, where the language tends to be, again, more abstract, more analytical. Marshall McLuhan considered metaphor to be a rich, inclusive concept. So he famously described electric light as a pure information form, a medium without a message, making it a metaphor for the electric age. For him, metaphors go beyond literary devices. They are perceptual positions from which society can understand complex phenomena. McLuhan might argue that every technology or medium is a metaphor itself, insofar as it translates human experiences and actions into new forms. Now, Geertz, his work centered on the interpretation of culture. So he viewed metaphors as these deep-seated mechanisms of thought and he believed that they were thought that structure human understanding. Within his ethnographic work, metaphors emerge as cultural symbols. They're rich with meaning and significance, and they shape how individuals perceive and experience their reality. And he would likely see metaphors as part of his thick description, where the metaphors both reveal and conceal meanings, providing insights into the underlying structures of cultures. So, Shrikant, I decided that that was the only thing I was going to actually present, just because, you know, if I keep adding stuff, it could get very...
Can you do me a favor? Can you go back to slides 1, 2, 3? So the last one is on, so first one is culture, second one is on communication, and third is on metaphor. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. You know, I like this entire format where you put things down and go from there. Now, I'm going to invite anybody who is familiar with Marshall McLuhan or Walter Ong, because in that sense, you know, these two are very close together, because Ong is a student of Marshall McLuhan, a PhD student. So he did his dissertation under McLuhan, heavily influenced by McLuhan. So many of the things that are attributed here to Ong certainly, you know, a lot of them come from Marshall McLuhan. There are differences between the two, and differences in focus between the two, but those two as a pair. So if anybody is familiar with Marshall McLuhan or Walter Ong, I want to invite them to comment at this point on their views of culture, communication, metaphor, you know, the role of the communication in shaping culture, anything that you would like to say. So let's start with that. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark if you would like to comment. I will start with one comment. And this, the most fundamental thing that I have seen on this topic is from Mark Stallman of the Center for the Study of Digital Life. And the simplest observation here is, oh, wait a minute, Chris is here. Chris, go ahead.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt your flow, Shrikant.
No. I have a very flexible flow. So this is a very delightful interruption. So Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, it's good to see you, Shrikant. Nice to be a part of the discussion, and thank you for that really nice overview. I threw Mark Stallman and Andrew McLuhan Do have some familiarity with Marshall McLuhan. I have less familiarity with the other two. So I like how you come at this from multiple perspectives to try to land a point of view. I have more of a question than a comment on McLuhan studies. And that is because the dominant communications technology shapes how we think, how we communicate, how we derive meaning, that if anyone on this call has a view on what phase we're in now, Shrikant, you invoked Mark. Obviously, he feels strongly we're in a new paradigm. It's a digital paradigm. It actually retrieves scribal tendencies. I don't always see eye to eye with that view, and I'm just wondering if anyone has a view on what phase we're in, because that then shapes how we might derive meaning from metaphor and what we can learn from Ong and McLuhan. Because clearly we're being reshaped by new means as we speak.
Thank you, Chris, for putting that on the table. Let me go ahead and let me step back and start at the beginning, because I think really the power of looking at these multiple perspectives is to first see how they apply to something that is in the past, because it is easier to see how things worked out in the past. Current time is the hardest to understand because it is new, and it is the implications of it, the effects of it are not fully grasped. They are not necessarily front and center. You have to look for them. So I want to start off with the entire sequence of different technological eras that Mark Stallman of CSTL talks about. Let's first start with the three. Oral. So in Maritza's slide, we talked about oral. This was regarding Ong. Ong distinguishes oral and print. How does the mind work? How does the communication work when it is in an oral context, face to face with people that you know, versus in a printed format? But there is something in the middle, which we will come to in a second, which is called scribal. So there is the oral, there is print, with a gap in the middle. After print, there is the electric or television media, which is in many ways retrieving the oral. It is going back from print back into oral. So let's take these three. So there is oral, there is print, and there is electric. Now, between oral and print, there is an era which Mark calls scribal. And that, I think, is one of the most fascinating eras. Actually, much of the meetups, many of the meetups, good 30% of them that we have done at 52 Living Ideas are of thinkers and philosophies and religions that were there during this scribal era. We studied Tao Te Ching, Bhagavad Gita, and the Bible. They're all right in the scribal era. So what is scribal? Scribal is when writing is there, writing has developed and has become prominent, but printing has not come yet. So the way in which people engage with writing is with what Ong calls the oral envelope. So there is a book. People are reading the book to each other, discussing the book, having a conversation, and writing. So it's scribes. So there is not just passive readers of books, but people always have writing. And there is this, and it's not just done individually, but in a community of many people focused on writing, having this rich dialogue between them. So it has the characteristics of both oral and print, if you will, but it is far more integrative. and scalable. So integration is there at the oral level, but the scalability is not there at the oral level. The scalability is there at the print level, but it doesn't have the integrity of the person, the character, the emotion, the body language, the concepts, the actions are all tied together, which is what is the nature of the scribal mode. And these result in dramatically different cultures and cultural implications. So I want to focus on this. And of course, what the electric age is going back to the oral age. It is retrieving the oral age. And then we will come to the digital age. But that's how both Marshall McLuhan and Walter Ong think about how these medias work. So now I want to open it up for these, any kind of discussion of these four media. Let's come to digital last, once we've gotten at least how these three thinkers apply, think about these earlier times. Once we have that, then we will come to digital. Let's go to DLJ next. And folks, I invite you, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. This is conversation, so you're welcome to express your own thoughts, ask questions, and let's see what we can do. DLJ.
Yes, thanks. I was going to chip in with a potential answer to Chris's question. Yeah, I appreciate what Mark Starman put forward. I wasn't convinced. I mean, I like the history and understanding in the electronic flipping it back to oral. I thought that all that's good observations, but I'm not sure that's the underlying metaphor. Yeah, that I think Douglas Adams picked up on it better. He identified that we have moved in our ability to communicate from one to one, one to many, and many to one. Think about town criers and early political meetings, and one person lecturing, or soirees, coffee shops that all of that, right? So we sit one to one, small groups, small villages, and so on. One to many, many to one. But now we're very much in the age of many to many. And that's the major paradigm shift that is moving us, like Twitter, right? So anybody can talk to anybody. So it changes the dynamic of society in a much bigger way than I think the medium facilitates that. But I'm not sure that medium is the message. I think it's the ability to communicate in a particular way is what changes the structure. I've got a bit of an issue on the culture slide, because I think they're actually talking about different things, but I'll come back on that if you want to talk about it.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you, I understand one to one and one to many and many to many. What is many to one?
So this is ability to feed back to a politician, let's say, right? So if you've got a representative democracy, as an example. That's an interesting one, because when I've been writing about this before, that's the hardest one to try and think of examples for. So that's the only one I've got is the representative democracy. Theoretically, anyway, you should be able to feed your ideas to the one person, many to one, and then that one person represents you. But it's actually harder to find examples for that one. Yeah.
Excellent, great. Great. That's great example. Very, very clarifying. Thank you. All right. Anybody else wants to comment at this stage? We will go ahead. Bob, go ahead.
I think you said it, Shrikant, referring to the. I lost it here. I lost the three ideas.
The oral, scribal, and print.
Yeah, oral is expresses immediacy, feelings, and you can see that. Print is you lose the immediacy, but you can go into a great deal of detail. So you can a print gives you opportunity to think about a lot of things, whereas oral you have to take what you get. What was the last one? Or television,
electric, yes.
Television. I think of that being one to many. there are many viewers of television, and when you look at television, you have to take what they dish out. As far as many to one, well, that is how a democracy tends to operate. The democracy gives you a feeling, the group feeling presents themselves somehow, and the leaders or the politicians are the one, and they have to accept that as feedback, and it goes both ways. Many to one and one to many are a pair.
That's a very good point. Absolutely. That I think that is a very, very good observation. Bob, these are fantastic. So let me just comment on a few of them. So one, I really like your distinction of immediacy of oral and not so in print. And I also like, kind of focus on feelings versus kind of dispassionate, kind of holistic versus details, just mostly reactive in oral versus deliberate thinking out of things carefully that is there in the print. Now, what I want to point out is that the scribal shares the advantages of both those things. So it is because you're working with the written works, it can be non-immediate. You can put something down which has a much more longer shelf life. At the same time, you're engaging with it in concert with other people and talking and writing about it at the same time. So there is an element of immediacy and non-immediacy at the same time. It is something that is, because it is written, it is possible to be dispassionate, reasonable about it. At the same time, you're seeing the emotions and feelings of people as they are engaging with the material and conversing about the material. So you're bringing in both kind of thought and emotion in that way. It is, because it is written, it can deal with details just as well as print. But because you're talking about it continuously with other people, you're always putting those details in an integrated context for each other. So you never get this dissipative effect where somebody is just breaking things down without ever putting it together. Just like the print allows you to think about things in detail, so does the scribal. But it does that by connecting it to the characters of people and the actions of people who are engaged in that. So in that sense, both these characteristics are merged together in the scribal. That's beautiful point. Thank you very much, Bob. Next up is going to be Chris, followed by Bill. Chris.
So Shrikant, I'm going to go against your comment about looking to history.
Please.
In light of some of the comments that were just made, because I'm particularly curious is what happens when you insert machines into the spectrum, right? So the fact that we have been in an environment where there have been, using again some of the comments or metaphors before, many machines talking to many machines to kind of serve up what we see. Now with the rise of AIs and GPTs, now you're gonna have many machines delivering media, if you will, to a scale of one, right? So this is a huge paradigm break where it's not just humans interacting with other humans. Now we're going to have humans and AIs intermixing, and it's kind of interesting in the setup how Ong and McLuhan and Geertz would view this, or Shrikant, how you might view this, or anyone else on this call.
Chris, great point. I mean, it is certainly a completely new world, because you've got, it is, the digital is a significant technology change. It's a huge technology change, and as DLG pointed out, is that it is many to many. It is many to many, and also it actually captures. And the beautiful thing about the digital is that it actually can serve up one-to-one. It can serve up one-to-many. It can serve up many to one. It can serve up many-to-many. It is able to do many-to-many and then serve things up to individual exactly what they want based on the many-to-many interaction. So it is completely, it is definitely something radically new. And just like what, writing, I think writing changed things. The difference between the oral civilization, that we had, when we lived in a group of 30 on the savannas, and a city that is so dramatically different from each other. Digital promises to be a break of that kind. In that sense, print was also a huge transformation. Electric in some ways is like simply going back. So I agree with you that it's something, profoundly transformative. Exactly what it does, I don't know. I mean, I'm completely puzzled about it. And it's something that, all of us are working on, all of us are struggling with. So thank you for bringing that up. Next up is going to be Bill, followed by Robert.
Shrikant, before, I'm sorry, let me just jump in for one quick second. Sorry, Bill.
Please take your time. Go ahead.
I just wanted to point out that, all three of these thinkers, in their very own way, they deal with how technological changes have fundamentally altered human culture and cognitive processes, like all three of them. So Geertz's work, it's not specifically focused on technology per se, but he's considering how various cultural technologies, such as art, ritual, language, shape social life. And the fascinating thing about the point that Chris just brought up is that, art, ritual, and language all also undergo major shifts when we do this shift from oral to written, and then the shift from, written to print. It's really interesting. I feel like Geertz fit in nicely with the other two because he's taking and looking at all three of those technologies and viewing them through a similar lens of the impact they have and how they totally rearrange what we consider to be social life.
Thank you. Maritza, what I want to do is that most of us are familiar with McLuhan and Ong, as a result of familiarity with McLuhan. But we are not that familiar with Clifford Geertz. So what I'm proposing is that let us have this round of comments, and then I will, ask you to kind of talk a little bit more extensively about Clifford Geertz, because I'm not able to actually place him. It is too, the points that were made were not, I was not able to fully understand where he's coming from. So perhaps, we will just look at Marshall McLuhan and Ong right now. If anybody's familiar with Geertz, they can bring it in. But then I want to take some time to really look at Geertz and see where he's coming from, just have you talk a little bit more expansively about that. And then we will try to bring all these three together. Does that make sense to you? Thank you. All right, next up is Bill, followed by Robert. Bill.
Thanks. So I want to make a point about this distinction between orality and literacy. So far, I've been tonight, in the last 10, 15 minutes, I've been hearing people talk about how literacy and the written word has advantages over orality and the spoken word. And that's true that it does. On the other hand, I want to give an historical example of the ways in which orality has an advantage over literacy. And this comes from a book by a 21st century professor of medieval English history entitled, quote, "From Memory and Myth to Written Records between the year 1000 and the year 1300. And the point is really very simple, which is that as written words and written records and written parchment and documents started to proliferate, there was a large segment of public opinion that was saying, oh, but spoken word is better. And there's, in his book, he literally says, quote, in the minds of these people, quote, the written law, the true written law is not inscribed on parchment or paper or scrolls. It is inscribed in the human mind. And therefore, spoken word gives more direct access to, quote, the true written law rather than parchment. And so the reason I'm putting this example on the table is that it raises the question of the downsides of the written word. Like, can it be unintentionally straying from genuineness and authenticity in a way that, you know, spoken word just remains more genuine and authentic? Also, can the written word be vulnerable to intentional misleading, the intention to intentionally mislead or disinform in a way that the spoken word is not vulnerable to that? Because when you're literally talking to someone, you can tell if they sound genuine or if they sound authentic or if they sound like you can maybe even read the poker tell on their face that they're maybe, you know, not quite being authentic with what they're saying. So I just wanted to put this alternative view on the table, and I'll put in the chat a link to the book on Amazon.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Actually, Walter Ong agrees with this position. So one of his most famous quotes is, all text is pretext, because it is assuming that it is capturing something. I know my rejoinder to that, continuation of that, all text is pretext because it is missing the context. So what he's saying is that the oral has the context with it. It is all included, like the person is right there, what is being done is right there, the feedback mechanism, the consequences in physical action are right there, and the word is carrying, is conditioned by all of that. But when you separate the word out and put it down on a piece of paper, then it is pretending to carry that, but it is not. It is separated out from the writer, and it is separated out from the reader in ways. So that is Walter. Walter Ong would agree with this position. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, can I say something briefly in response to that?
Please.
I want to connect it back to Chris Perry's point about bringing into the picture the 21st century. So in the 21st century, with information technology being what it is, it can expand the audience for a given writer of a text message or creator of, a YouTube video. And it expands that audience to people who don't know the producer of the text or the producer of the YouTube. And so they don't have any context to judge, whether what they're saying is useful, accurate information or misinformation, intentionally or unintentionally. And you get all this proliferation of deep fakes and alternative truths. So the great decrease in the cost of communication enabled by 21st century technology, where Twitter, you can have 10 million people following your Twitter feed, has a downside to it, which is that you lose the personal connection with the producer of these communications, and you lose the context with which to judge whether to believe what they're saying. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bill. Next up is Robert. Robert, go ahead. Robert, if you could unmute yourself first.
Hello, this is not an area of expertise for me, so forgive this basic question. You kept referring to Scribble, and I don't know what that means, and it combines both audio and written. Can you briefly describe that, please?
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for that question, because so let me go ahead and do that. I think I rushed through it very quickly. Scribble age, as Mark Stallman of CSDL defines it, it is basically with the advent of writing. It starts with the advent of writing. And this is this is at the same time as advent of cities. So it's like 4000 BC, and it really takes off from there all the way till printing. So it is when writing is there, but printing is not there. It is the start of the civilizations. It is kind of the growth of religions. It is written law for the first time, all of these things. So scribal is defined by when there is writing, but not yet printing. This is like the beginning of civilization. That's what it's, yes, Bible was scribal, Tao Te Ching is scribal, Bhagavad Gita is scribal. These are all written, somewhere around, I look at it as generally like 500 BC to 500 AD. That is really the core period of the scribal age. And it is characterized by books being extremely precious. So for example, at University of Paris, where Aquinas was, the books would be nailed to particular places. So they couldn't take them away. And you would go, people would gather around them, read the book out aloud, write things. This is the peripatetic school of Aristotle, where the students would be going round and round, walking, reading something, and then writing things up. This is the gurukuls of India, where the students would be going and studying these sacred texts with their gurus at guru's home, staying there for several years as they learn. This is the same tradition of Lao Tzu and his students, and the Zen masters and their students, where there would be written texts, but there would be these dialogues between teacher and student, and between, in the school, that will really be responsible for engaging with the text, as opposed to one individual reading the book just by himself. Robert, does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. All right. So now what I want to do is, we've been talking mostly about McLuhan and Ong. And at least I'm not familiar, and we have not done meetups on Clifford Geertz. So let me interview Maritza. So Maritza, why did you pick this person? What do you like about him? Can you talk about his ideas, his approach to things? Go ahead. If you could unmute yourself.
Sorry, I apparently seem to have forgotten how to do that today. So again, I'm going to preface by saying not an expert. So Geertz was interesting to me because he's actually an anthropologist turned philosopher. So he's more of a scholar than a philosopher, but he's considered to be instrumental in the manner in which we study and perceive the social sciences today. So he was interesting to me from that perspective, and I'd seen him just a little bit here and there. And I have a fascination with culture, and I've been looking, as we do, you look to the history to see how that can help inform you on path forward. And he was kind of spent most of his life rejecting, like jumping up and down and rejecting causal determinism. And I've been studying, correlation versus causality. And so that's how he came back across my path. And it just so happened that I was like, wait a minute, he's more talking about culture than he is about, and I know it's the social sciences, but it's the cultural the aspect of culture. He has a book called The Interpretation of Cultures, and he was looking at how the people of Bali saw themselves in relation to violence, social status, morality, and belief, and he was using it to kind of debunk the idea of like so-called primitive groups, and he's saying, meet them at their level, and you will find a richness that your 1,000-foot level can't possibly see. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing, but that's, and he's looking at it from, and what I find striking is that he's like, we have to look at culture as he's like, it's what comprises culture. It's just a whole bunch of little metaphors and put together. That's what culture is. And every time you look at it from a different angle, it's going to be slightly different. And so I really like that he's just, every time he spoke up, he was just rejecting the idea that culture could possibly be one thing. And he invited people to also stop looking at, to observing. So he believed that mere observation of a culture could not give you enough of a view or idea of what comprised that culture. And he did presentations and lectures all the time, encouraging people to be more targeted and more purposeful, and to, if they wished to study a culture, he said it should be done with intent. And he, he was always talking about how you had to look and methodically seek to find the metaphors and how they're interpreted within the culture itself.
So if I wanted to compare this, so like, people like Marshall McLuhan or Walter Ong, if we wanted to compare them versus this, because they are, in some ways, they seem to be close together to me, based on everything I know.
Mm-hmm.
How would you distinguish? What's the difference between Geertz and Marshall McLuhan and Ong on the other side?
The difference, I think, sorry, I was thinking of I'm cheating. I'm looking at my notes. Sorry. So they had I was looking at it. So I had put in the meetup, the lens, right? They look at culture through a different lens. And I had identified Geertz's as symbolic, whereas Ong would have been more cognitive, and McLuhan technological. And that's kind of, this very 1,000-foot level, but it's idea of, if we're looking at it, it would be culture culture as text versus medium. And, Geertz's metaphor of culture as text, it contrasts with McLuhan's idea of that the medium is, formative to culture. So, and Ong would be the bridge between Geertz and McLuhan, because he sees writing itself as a technology that transforms the cultural text. So he's kind of the bridge that Geertz's view of, the culture as text can filter through towards McLuhan's idea of, the medium being what forms culture.
Thank you. I think DLJ had a comment on culture. Go ahead, DLJ.
Yes, thank you. Here's a good moment to make it, I think. Yeah, I mean, the other two slides, the metaphor and the communication, I largely didn't disagree with any of them. They didn't seem to, I mean, they were looking at different aspects of the system, or whether it's a system, but all okay, I think. I think the big difference I noticed was the culture. So Ong was, in my view, he's talking about tradition. Now, bear in mind, I don't know none of them. I don't know their bodies of work. So
let me interrupt just for a second. Maritza, can you put up the slide with culture, so it'll be easier for people to follow what DLJ is saying?
Absolutely.
Easy for me to follow what I'm saying too. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know their full body of work. So I'm going for I'm treating Maritza's cut down version here as an authority, but I always take what Maritza says as gospel, so I'm okay with that. So yeah, so some of you have seen my presentation. Bill's seen it. Katie's got a copy. Shukant, I sent it to you. I'm not sure if you've got it. You received it. Might have gone to junk mail. But there's a slide in there where I'm showing it's essentially all about ecosystem, but it's like organizational structures versus collective individuals. and then which is culture essentially. So culture is aggregate behavior according to the best practice books that I teach. But there's also high culture. So high culture is the kind of the art, for example, but also historically fossils, artifacts, you know. So I'm seeing bits of that different diagram here in these definitions, right? Tradition is more like a baseline, and therefore it's an input to culture. So so I'm seeing Walter Ong's description there is more to do with tradition, so a baseline. Marshall McLuhan, I'm fine with that one because that's more like a snapshot. Culture is a snapshot. So jazz culture, black culture, Jewish culture, whatever you want to pick, right? And of course they all overlap, right? So I'm seeing his description of culture and more as the current best practice definition. And then high culture, well, Geertz, is it Geertz? Geertz, I don't know. He was, after all, an anthropologist. So I think he's going to see through a lens of cultural artifacts, right? So I'm seeing that's much more of the high culture artifacts kind of part of the system. They all kind of have to interact together to create what we call, you know, us and society and so on. So then none of them are particularly wrong. I'm thinking, yeah, tradition, culture, and high culture are probably the three different ways they're looking through them.
Thank you. Thank you, DLJ. Great point. So you're saying tradition, culture, and high culture.
Yeah, so culture is more like a snapshot of what now is. Tradition is a baseline. It's like a well, just think of, you know, the Jewish tradition as opposed to Jewish culture, right? Also Islam as being part of the tradition, Muslim more like the culture. And there is a difference because the way it's practiced versus the way it's written, you know what I mean, right? You get the idea.
Thank you, DLJ. All right, Maritza, can you stop sharing? Thank you. All right. So Maritza, we can go in multiple directions from here. I mean, I still don't have a very good grasp myself on Geertz. So I'm a little bit at sea on comparing all the three. So I want to ask you if you have any ideas about how to proceed. I can always do things with just Marshall McLuhan and Walter Ong a little bit, but I'm kind of lost when I'm dealing with Geertz. So do you have any thoughts about how we can proceed?
Yes. So in the just little snippets that I provided, we can see some of the differences. And I was looking specifically at, so there's, I have a couple high level contrasts. It's like there's the idea of the analytic approach. There's all three of them look at that concept differently. There's the idea of the individual versus the collective. And these are concepts in which and then there's the technological focus. And all three of them look at it, they do look at that concept, but they look at it just slightly differently. And I thought it might be interesting to look at, so the question we're asking, how communication shapes culture. And all three of them, they answer that they're all three making the bold statement that communication certainly does, but they're all three doing it in a slightly different way. It's and I look at it from, and I put, this was the bit I put in the write-up, was that they're looking at, if we have, I'm going back to the cognitive, the technological, and the symbolic. And I think those three sound bites are the best way to go forward, comparing and contrasting, like, what are the advantages and or disadvantages of looking at culture through the lens of symbology, or the lens of technology, or the lens of cognitive. Do we think that there is a advantage or disadvantage over either? Or do any of them stand out as antiquated in the thinking? Is there, so just some thoughts I was thinking.
Sure. So that's one way of proceeding. We can go ahead and do that. So folks, if you would like to take that up and run with it, you're welcome to do that. You can go ahead and type an exclamation mark. I'll put one more thing on the table here. and that is about the oral communication. Because if you kind of look at what they're saying behind the words, right? Ong really likes the oral. And he's saying that something was lost when, you move to literate culture. Geertz is very much focused on the oral, very much focused on the oral. And he's actually focused on the oral far more deeply than Geertz, than Ong, because Ong is looking at oral everywhere and saying, okay, this is what it is, and this is what the things are. Whereas you're saying, no, you need to actually look at each of the oral cultures and see the specific symbol and set of symbols that they are using, specific metaphors that they are using. So he's going far more deeper into oral, it seems to me, based on what little I know. And then Marshall McLuhan has actually a lot of grasp of the oral, and in the most interesting way, with his familiarity and mastery of the television medium. He was a celebrity, and he was very, very effective. You should watch his videos of his appearances on various shows. Just real master of that medium. And so he has it in the form of the electric or TV. He is actually a master of actually using this thing. So they have these particular things on oral. So we can also look at just the oral medium and see what it is and what we think of it, because so that's one. Let's see. Bill, can you go ahead and read what you put in the chat? Because we need more context on Geertz. Bill, go ahead.
You mean just read the words from my chat?
Yeah, just read the words.
Okay. Geertz claims that human action can only be understood by considering the full context of a person's action, which includes the cultural symbols and meanings in which that action is embedded. Geertz therefore argued that when the goal is to explain human behaviors, thick description is a better method of explanation than thin description. On this point, he wrote, quote, "It is not against a body of uninterrupted data, radically thinned descriptions that we must measure the cogency of our explications, but against the power of the scientific imagination to bring us into touch with the lives of strangers." So can I explain a thing or two about that?
Please do.
So what he's saying is that when a social scientist tries to explain a person's action or actions, the social scientists needs to see that person's action from their own point of view in terms of that person's worldview, that person's cognitive infrastructure by which they understood their own world and their own culture. That's the only way to really understand the person's actions. And Geertz was arguing against a much different methodology in social science, which was just stripping away all the context and just looking at one or two little factors that were driving the behavior of the research subject that you're trying to explain. It's like just one or two and ignoring all the other factors. He was arguing against that. He's saying you have to really appreciate the full world and context of a person's actions to really ever have a chance of understanding why they do what they do and why they say what they say. So is that clear?
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. It was very clear. And thank you for putting the quote, reading it out and explaining it. Thanks. Because, I want to get more of Geertz on the table, and that's what you succeeded in doing. Next up is Bob Pan. Bob.
Shrikant, let me jump in there very quickly. Just with one, I want to piggyback off of what Bill was just saying. So Geertz was also, he often talked about so his approach is often called interpretive anthropology, and it's focusing on understanding the meanings behind cultural practices and symbols rather than just documenting or describing them. And so he's known for his advocacy of this thick description, which Bill had mentioned, and he defines that it's a method of research that involves detailed accounts of cultural practices. This concept is contrasted with the thin description, where you're just recording actions without context. And to me, that's kind of the key element that makes him stand out from other approaches to culture, is that he's saying context is key. He says a thick description means interpreting the layers of meaning and significance that cultural actions and symbols have for those who engage with them.
Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. Very useful. Next up is going to be Bob.
I'll just take a shot at this because I don't know this fellow Geertz, but so I could be wrong about this. But there's an awful lot of new. I mean, could just throw this out if this is not good. There's an awful lot of news going on about the current wars that are going on, and you have a presentation of one side, and you have a presentation of the other side, and they are certainly not communicating very well. But if you look at what one side is saying, behind them is maybe it's an Islamic point of view, or maybe it's the way they have lived is just the opposite, or is different than the other side. I'm talking Muslim and Judaic and Israeli. Just take a look at the different forms of the way that they communicate.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be Bill. Bill, go ahead.
Thanks. So I want to draw a connection between McLuhan and Geertz. So McLuhan focused on the effects of the medium of communication on the substance of communication. And he listed 4 effects. The medium can amplify the contents. It can oppositely decrease the salience of the contents. The medium can retrieve old contents that were previously silenced. And the medium can flip the meaning of the contents 180 degrees. So from this point of view, let's bring these points into contact with Geertz. Geertz talks about like the full context of an actor's actions in terms of what their actions mean for them in their worldview, in their culture, et cetera, et cetera. So the question is, does communication technology strip away? I guess you could probably point to examples where communication technology strips away these layers of cultural meanings that a person's actions have for them and for others, and it can kind of decrease the sale. I don't know. I should probably stop trying to explain this. I just have a hypothesis, which is that in some cases, communication technology in the 20th and 21st centuries can kind of take things out of context and kind of leave to the side or leave ignored a bunch of context behind what a person's saying. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to think this through. I'm interested in what others think about this. What does technology do to the communicator's context that's coming through their behavior, like what their etc. amplifies or decreases? I don't know. I'll listen to others.
Thank you. Thank you. And a great point. Thank you for bringing up the tetrad that McLuhan uses on this. So maybe we can use the tetrad here of saying, we can just look at 2 things, I think, just the oral and print. because they provide the maximum contrast, because scribal is like combination of these, and then TV is like retrieval of the oral, and digital is too difficult to figure out, so I'm not going to try. But let's just talk about oral and print and try to see what is it that they do. So for example, let's look at print. What is it that it enhanced? What is it that it displaced? What is it that it retrieved? And what is it, if you use it too much, what does it flip into? So that's one question, and you can go ahead and address that for print. And then oral, we can't start with oral and see what it does, because that's our native heritage, that's our biological heritage. But we can look at it in the context of television, because television is retrieving the oral. So when it retrieved the oral, what did it enhance? What did it displace? What was it retrieving? And if you use too much of it, what does it flip into? So if you want to answer this question either about print or about television, please go ahead. There's no right answer, so you can go ahead and you can find the answers of McLuhan in his Laws of Media to both these questions. But if anybody wants to give it a shot of saying what is it that print does in terms of what does it enhance? So what does print enhance? I don't know whether there is a good way of retrieval. You can ask retrieval too. So
it enhances misinformation quite a lot, doesn't it?
What's that?
Print, a lot of our print media enhances mis and disinformation very well.
Yes, but that's just one of the effects, right? It's not like it's not really the way in which McLuhan uses these concepts is saying, like, it is like enhancement of your senses. What is it that it enhances? And that not just kind of one of the bad effects of it. So the misinformation would be in the flip quadrant, as per saying that if you use too much of it when there is a lot of print in all kinds of ways, it can generate misinformation. All right, maybe it's too difficult a question.
Well,
Go ahead.
It enhances accessibility. Before print, things were painstakingly copied by hand. Now it's easier to disseminate information.
Very good, very good.
It's the one-to-many enhancement, isn't it? Or the speed of.
Yes, I think one-to-many, definitely. Let's see. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I just thought of a thought experiment that contrasts the written versus the oral. Imagine the difference between seeing and hearing a stage play in a theater when you're sitting in the audience and you can see the actors on the stage, versus, on the other hand, reading the exact same play in a book. I think if you're seeing it and seeing the people's body language of the actors on the stage, that's going to convey the context of their behavior and words towards each other in a really visceral way that you're going to get it, and it's going to register on a very human level. Whereas if you're just reading the same stage play in a book, I'm not sure that the analytical mode that the mind is in while reading words on a page is really going to register the context, the full lives of the actors of the people in the play in the same way. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to comment on this oral versus print? Maybe we can approach it another way. We are used to the print culture quite a bit, and the oral culture has gone through kind of very interesting stages, because at TV, you are actually engaging in it, but it is passive. So you're that interactivity you're losing. So I don't know. Let's talk about the virtues of oral medium for some time, and then maybe we can talk about the virtues of the print medium.
We're
Right?
doing it now, aren't we?
Go ahead.
We are doing it now. We're doing oral one-to-one, many-to-many, and all.
Exactly.
If we all took, look, just try an experiment. Every unmute, talk at the same time. That's a perfect example of many-to-many digital digital/oral communication. Chaos, basically.
No, that is the example of flip. Is that when you have the flip?
No, I'm being flippant, in fact. Yes.
Yes, I know. And I'm trying to flip you into the right quadrant. That's it. Okay. So I mean, we can go, let's do both of them. Okay. What is it that writing does for us? And what is it that conversation at its best? So forget about all the ways in which things can go wrong. Just focus on what can a conversation do which just reading a book can't. That's one question. You know what? Let's first answer that question. The second question coming up is going to be, what is it that a book can do which a conversation cannot? Okay, so let's answer those two questions. Let's first talk about conversation. What is a conversation? What's the use of this conversation? The books are there, right? You can go read McLuhan, you can read Ong, you can read Geertz, they're sitting there. You can just pick them up and read them. Why are you here? Why are you talking? What do you say? Say something.
I'm gonna
Maritza, go ahead first.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, DLJ. I'm gonna tackle this looking at our three thinkers here. So we're looking at what can oral do for us. I would say that Ong is going to answer that question by saying that oral communication is it's inherently participatory and situational. So what it's bringing is that it's fostering collective memory and a strong sense of community. McLuhan is going to tell us that oral communication is a spoken medium, and it's going to involve a high degree of sensory involvement, and it fosters a holistic, non-linear perception of the world. And he's going to tell us it's a more interconnected experience. And Geertz is going to say to us that the oral communication it gives us this rich tapestry of symbols and meaning, which is conveyed not just in words, but in the manner of their delivery. Tone, emphasis, and context are going to be play a pivotal role in this oral medium. And so as such, it's serving as a living repository for a culture's values and beliefs.
Wonderful. DLG, let Jen go first because she has not spoken yet. Jen, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Yeah, so I think the difference is when you're reading, you just have one perspective. When you're talking with other people, you basically have several perspectives at the same time. That may also stimulate you see things differently, while you're talking. So I think it's just like all the communication with other friends, we always, every time we gather with friends, it just all these things you never expected happening. And there's this energy like people don't experience when they're alone. And I think when you're alone, the advantage is you can more reflective, so you can get deeper understanding of things. But it's deeper maybe in one perspective. I don't know, that's just my guess. Another thing I want to say is I was thinking recently about all this multimedia. And I realized, we are so limited by the media we're using to communicate. And in the past, because of the only way we can pass on the knowledge is through paper printing, because there's no TV or there's no recorder. That's why we have to rely on written. But then there's TV. Now there's this internet high speed. Now there's video and all this. And I realized, today, everybody seems to have to know how to edit the video in order to fully communicate. It's just like writing in the past. Now you not only need to write, you have to make a short movie, basically. Everybody making their own short movies to convey their idea. It's like become so basic, like what writing is for us in the past. That's just my thought.
Excellent, excellent point. Thank you. I think the point about multiple perspectives is a very deep point. But let's continue. Would love to hear from many people about why they are here. Why are you talking about this? Instead of just reading this, it's so easy to read. Next up is DLJ, followed by Bill. DLJ.
Yeah, so the trouble with opening the door and allowing somebody to go before you is that you're not the first. So Gung's just said what I was going to say pretty much. Okay, so the first thing I was thinking was laziness. I don't have to read 3 bodies of work when Maritza can do it for me. Moreover, though, more importantly, this conversation tells me whether it's worth reading those 3 bodies of work and whether I should actually take the time to do it. So it's a bit like a book's dust cover, right? I'm reading the blurb. Basically, I was going, okay, that's I might dig into that. I don't know about Geertz, is it? Is that what I'm saying? So I think I should. So there you go. That's worked already. And then, yeah, it was Gung's point. It was conversation helps me judge the value through other people's experiences. So it could be that my interpretation of what I'm going to read is it's going to be my interpretation, right? Whereas you've got other people's opinions and critiques, very importantly. So it's like, that person you shouldn't read because usually inspires me to go and read them. You get the idea. So yeah, I was beaten to it.
Excellent point. No, I think you added that you used the fact that somebody else kind of gave you this ball, lobbed the ball for you, and then you were able to hit it further. No, the point here is that it is kind of collaborative work. You're benefiting from the work that other people have done already. It's not either or. We are all at 52 Living Ideas. We're all talking about, written works, really. And those are the foundation. And this is like what we are doing is really scribal. It is not oral culture. It is scribal because we are using some written work and written works. Actually, we are trying to actually look at what Maritza is doing. It's like 3 different works, generally not put together, now this one, it happens that Marshall McLuhan and Ong are related, but typically it's not. And you're trying to get these 3 perspectives in one place. And Maritza is doing the work of doing like the first pass at it to get the discussion going. Then we are leveraging people who actually know one of them really well. And they go and talk about that one of them. And then there are people who say, oh, that's interesting. Marshall McLuhan keeps coming up and he always says interesting things. So I should read more of him. So it's like there is this loops going on, but it's the loops of various people interacting with one another, producing a far more richer combination for each person. I mean, it requires certain things. It requires kind of openness. The other thing I want to say here is that it is different from oral culture in a fundamental way, because oral culture in its traditional form, it is in one community. And there are all these shared things together. You grow up together. Your language is the same. Your symbols are the same. And you're all working within that. This conversation, though it is oral, is fundamentally different because we have become from all kinds of places. DLJ alone speaks from Malaysia, Australia, and UK at the same time sometimes. But we have very different backgrounds. We have very different knowledge. Yet we are engaging in a conversation like human beings. do when they have known each other for a long period of time. You can see the emotion in the face of somebody when they are going gaga over somebody, some thinker, and you're saying, that one idea I really need to pursue, even if I don't read anything else. This one thing, the tetrad, this guy keeps talking about the tetrad. So what is tetrad? And you can just zoom in on that one particular thing in this entire large corpus. So we're sharing the maps that we have with each other. So there is a lot going on. Next up is Bill. Bill, go ahead.
So I want to take the example first, to address this question you're asking about the oral versus the written. I want to take the example of private sector firms, where a private sector firm will conduct, where there's teamwork that needs to be done by a team in the company. And some of that teamwork is done in meetings, but other of that teamwork is done through written documents like emails or drafts of working papers, whatever, proposals, etc., plans, whatever. And presumably, if it's a firm in a competitive market, there's a competition constraint that forces the firm to organize the way it does teamwork in the most efficient way. And therefore, it has a strong incentive to divide out the teamwork into meetings where that's the best way to go, the most productive product per amount of time spent, and then the other work out into in written form, because that produces the most product of the teamwork efforts per amount of time spent. And so under that assumption, you can kind of think intuitively what would be the advantages of the one versus the other. So teamwork, one advantage is a meeting of all the people in the same room at the same time is much more advantageous for brainstorming to problem solve, brainstorming to innovate, and eliciting preferences of all the people on a proposal. You can just say who likes this, who doesn't, when you're in a meeting. Whereas collecting all the information in written form, that would be much more costly and time consuming. Also, on this brainstorming notion, that's an example of how a meeting can create common knowledge at very low cost. So when the presenter at the meeting gives his presentation, and audience member 1 knows what the presenter said, and audience member 2 knows that audience member 1 knows what the presenter said in real time, simply by seeing that he's in the meeting. And what this enables is that when audience 1 has an intuitive thought during Q&A in response to the presentation, audience member 2 can observe, can listen to audience member 1 give his, comment, and then audience member 2 can have a comment, an inspiration in response to audience member 1's comment. And this is kind of how brainstorming works when you're in a meeting. To do this in writing, you couldn't do it in writing, because the reader number 2 of a document cannot know reader number 1's reaction in real time in the moment. The amount of emails you'd have to send around with written comments on the document would be so large and so much time. It's much easier to do it in a meeting. So that's all the advantages of meetings. And I've talked for a while, so let me just say a sentence or two about the advantages of the written. When it comes to formulating documents that are going to be commitments, you got to put it in writing. And when it comes to reformulating those written documents in terms of commitments among firm members or between firms and customers or whatever, you have to do it in writing. There's probably other advantages of the written form as well, planning as well, getting a plan down so that you can see the sequence of items in the plan, etc. So I'll stop there, but actually the implication of all that for why we do what we do here, there's probably some parallels. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, I really like this example. I really like this example because what it does is that it is actually it is actually pointing to when is each of these mediums useful, because it's not either or, it is yes and you have to figure out exactly where it should be used. So for example, to make a meeting productive, having a written agenda or having something that everybody is going to comment on, which is the result of a lot of work by maybe a smaller group of people, but now they have put it in a form that people can, it is a written form. So people, each person can read it in the privacy of their own mind and have ideas about it, and then going to the meeting. So that seeding the meeting with the right amount and right kind of writing is crucial to the productivity of the meeting. Also, saying so what from a meeting. Let's say you have a great meeting and it just ends. It's not good, because you need to kind of take the output of it in a written format, in something of saying, okay, these are the to-dos. These are the decisions that were arrived at. And that's something that you're shipping. So there is like the beginning and the end is written. And in the middle is the transformative process where you're getting all the perspectives and negotiating all. Does that make sense to you, Bill?
It does, and I would just add to it briefly in the following way. You talked about how a written document can provide the seeds for a meeting, and then the meeting can provide the seeds for the next version of the written document. And sometimes the meeting comes first. People just bat around ideas, and with the person who's going to be the main author of the document, first they all have a meeting together. And they spill the beans onto the table and they bat him around. And then he goes and he writes the document. So there, it's the meeting that is providing the seeds for the document. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's great. And another kind of implicit theme here is the relationship between individual and the group. You know, it is one person writing the document, and he can do as best a job as possible, but he needs the feedback from everybody else. And then he takes the feedback, and then that person goes ahead and puts together the document. The writing by its nature is, what I'm saying is that in this, it respects the work of an individual mind, paying close attention to things, organizing things, and doing the best each mind, that mind can do in order to produce something which is stable. And then you have this process, and then you have another version of it. So I really like this thing about kind of going, it's sequencing. It is different versions where you're going from written to written using the oral as a medium.
Real quick, could I say something on this?
Go ahead.
So crowdsourcing, there's people who study crowdsourcing and how like a crowd of 1,000 people at a county fair in Iowa, when asked to estimate the weight of a pig, just by looking at the pig, the larger is the size of the crowd, the more accurate the estimate is. So that's the function of a meeting, is the crowdsourced ideas are better than the ideas an individual could come up with himself. Number one. Number two, if the individual comes up with ideas that have problems with it, he might not see those problems himself, and the crowd can correct the problems. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Wonderful. Thank you. All right. Anybody else wants to add anything to this question of the value of conversation? If not, let's go to the other question. What is the value of writing? What does writing do for you? If conversation is all this good, why have writing at all? What does that do for you? Go ahead.
Let me start us off again with the written from the perspectives of these three guys. So Walter Ong would look at he would say the transition to literature fundamentally restructures human consciousness. He believed that writing allows for more abstract thinking, it encourages individualism, and introduces a sense of permanence and stability in knowledge that is absent in oral cultures. Marshall McLuhan is...
Can you repeat it one more time?
Sorry, yes. So Walter Ong, on the written medium, he's stating that the transition to literacy fundamentally restructures human consciousness. Writing allows for more abstract thinking, encourages individualism, and introduces a sense of permanence and stability in knowledge that is absent in oral cultures.
Okay, thanks.
For Marshall McLuhan, writing, and especially print, significantly alters human perception by encouraging linear thinking and individualism, so kind of similar to Walter Ong. And McLuhan also believes that the visual nature of writing shifts the sensory balance, moving cultures away from the collective auditory experience of oral traditions to a more fragmented and visually dominated mode of understanding. And Clifford Geertz is saying that writing would be another symbolic system, but one that offers a different mode of encoding and preserving cultural symbols. Written texts allow for the complex layering and permanent recording of cultural narratives, potentially leading to a more deliberate and reflective engagement with these narratives.
Excellent. All right, folks, who would like to add to this? What does writing do? What does writing do for us?
Are we talking about Bill's kind of writing as in the documentation of contracts and stuff, or are we talking about creative writing?
We're talking about writing as such. You know, look at a time before writing and after writing. What did writing do? And what does it do? What function it continues to serve through? If there are different kinds of writing, if that serve different functions, you're welcome to talk about them individually as well. But fundamentally, what's the function?
First thought in terms of why writing was why it caught on in early settler communities was invoicing. Really, it was a list of stuff, a list of wheat, and if you look at the what's those clay tablet thing called? There's a word for it, but I've forgotten it. But anyway, and a lot of them are to do with bills, invoices, so or debts, or essentially, so it creates that reference point or baseline. So bills on the right track there with a kind of contract kind of approach. Right? That's its original benefit. I think is why it caught on. Other than cave painting kind of way of scribing, which is the whole creative side. Yeah.
Thank you, DLJ. Anybody else wants to talk about writing? Bill, go ahead.
Fiction writing can be emotionally evocative and give the reader an opportunity to experience his own or her own emotions at a deeper level, and that can be cathartic or a growth experience. Scientific writing, either in natural sciences or social sciences, can actually perform a bridging function between abstract mathematical models and the kind of verbal explanation of them that makes them intuitively understandable, because the mind, especially the mind of someone who's not scientifically trained, does not immediately compute the language of equations and math equations. And so to take just a simple example, there's a field called law and economics in which these professors who have PhDs in economics and law degrees, they do write the mathematical models to explain why the laws take the form that they do, but then they transform them into words so that their models are intuitively graspable by people who do not have PhDs in economics. They only have law degrees and may not even be law professors. And so, words can perform that translation function to kind of spread scientific knowledge to people who aren't scientists by making it intuitively graspable. I'll stop there.
Thank you. And the middle term there is metaphor, because by using something concrete that people can grasp, can see, using that to refer to a concept allows them to grasp something which they cannot get it by concepts directly. So language is very powerful with its metaphors. That's too brief a comment, but let me go ahead and go with Mike. Mike, go ahead. 2 minutes, please.
2 minutes. Wow. I'll go back to where this all came from. Is
Mike, let's do one thing. Let's go a little bit back and forth, and then you can have 5 minutes. I just want to make sure that it remains on track. Go ahead.
I get confused if I have too much time. You know.
Okay, go ahead.
Ian McGilchrist, Julian Jaynes said all this started because of commerce and trade. They needed to keep track of accounts. So they started with a concept of numbers to keep track of who had what account. And words came later. Now, words are the problem why we have so much trouble, why McLuhan had so much trouble, why Ong had so much trouble was explained by Chomsky just recently. Now, I disagree with Chomsky politically completely, but Chomsky also plugged into this arena in a very intelligent way. You know that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? You've heard that before. But pictures, if you have pictures in terms, pictures are, you can get the concept of a picture with a lot fewer bits than by sending it pixel by pixel by doing JPEG or PNG or something else and compress it. But it's lossy compression. Words are a lossy compression of mind maps. When there's 33 people talking about here, and each one has a mind map of what's been said. None of those mind maps are lossy compression images of what was really said today. And we often have, when we're having negotiations or dialogues, now that you've given me exactly what I told you, let me tell you what I really want. And that always occurs. So words are lossy. And you really need to communicate in mind maps. When computers talk to each other in ChatGPT, they reduce those things to a vector that's points somewhere in hyperspace, and then they can look at all the nearest neighbors of what's in hyperspace and really get an idea what's going on. But it's all driven by people, so it's a lossy image. When we get to talk to each other in terms of transmitting the mind maps, then you'll know what I'm really thinking about all this. And maybe Star Trek had a communicator that worked together, talked to aliens and each other, so that they got to know some of that stuff. So they got to do that. So the issue is lossy. That mind maps are what we're really doing, and when we hear the Ian McGilchrist conversation, he talks about some of this. And if we go to some of Chomsky is old and senile, but he doesn't write any more books, but he has written some papers on this subject. And at a simple level, so did Jordan Peterson. Is that more than you really wanted about this stuff?
No, but that was great, Mike, because the fundamental point that you're making here, which you made in a very condensed way here, is that, what we have is mind maps. We have these networks of connections in our mind. And the words that we are using are a sequence, and somehow this entire network here of billions of connections has to transmit itself on this line. And communication is when the network in your brain kind of gets something of what I was trying to say. And it is actually I mean, to me, it is, when you think about it, it's quite an incredible thing that we can communicate like that. And a lot of it is trying to guess what is the mind map that you're talking to, and then using the feedback that you're getting in order to correct it, because it is, communication is only when the other person gets what you're saying. And for that, you have to understand what the other person is thinking. So you have to know the other person's mind map, so be able to tell what you're trying to tell as it relates to the mind map that they have. So a lot of communication is simply listening, and trying to say, okay, where is this person coming from? I certainly am guilty of talking too much and not listening, closely enough. But I think a lot of the value comes from that, and the lossiness of the words comes with the territory of what the words are. And we kind of have to accept that, and we have to live with that and know that it is worthwhile doing all the error correction of the loss in order to get something. So thank you, Mike. Great comments. Thank you. Next up
Did
is
I add something to that?
very briefly, Mike. There's
Very briefly.
ton of people waiting to talk. Go ahead.
Other people. There's a guy named Charles Luttridge Dotson who wrote a book that had three characters: Bob, Alice, and a very intelligent octopus. And they have some examples of all their conversations that were used as examples for paradoxes that modern AI is worried about, and how they really understood what each other was saying. Bob and Alice talking to each other with an octopus listening and occasionally putting in ideas.
Thank you, Mike. Next up is Katie.
I think a big advantage of writing is that we have access to people from.
Oops, sorry, Katie, my mistake. Can you continue?
Yeah, I was saying that the advantage of writing is that we can learn things from people who lived in different times. I think that's the biggest advantage, and also just the ability. If you were limited just to in person, you'd be limited to your ability to memorize, versus on writing, you can write a lot more, and you can pick it up across a long period of time.
Excellent points. Both. I mean, one is the issue of externalization. Because you can only be thinking about some things. If you externalize it, then it frees up your mind to think more things about it. It also allows you to be reflective about it. So the kind of thinking that you can do is really different than the thing that you can do only if you have no ability to write whatsoever. Now, once you've developed writing, some of that ability you internalize in your speaking and in your thinking. But writing is really about editing what you're writing in order to keep getting closer to the truth by being more reflective about it. So that's one, that's a great point. Also, the point about the time is very, very important. Owen Barfield, whom Phil covered so well, makes this point that with writing, you have the ability of seeing what a different consciousness was like at different times. We all have tendency of reading into people what we are when they were dealing with them. And that is absolutely true when you're looking at people from another age. But if you're really listening to them, you can actually see a different way of being, a different way of using the consciousness that different people at different times had, which can expand your idea of what a human being is, what you are, which you're getting so cheap through this written work, actually, because you do not have the ability actually to going and seeing what people in the ancient Greek were like and how they thought. But thanks to the writing, you get some glimpses of that way of being. Next up is Maritza, followed by Chen. Maritza.
No, I just wanted to throw in a couple of my comments. I keep talking about these three thinkers. So, my thoughts on what writing brings for us. I think it simultaneously provides us with increased, details, or like the word that sticks out to me is the increased permanence, right, of things that our ancestors did for us, as it were. But also there's the ability, and this is similar to what you were just saying, writing frees us up to be more creative, in that with oral only cultures, so much time must be spent passing on history, because it has to be transmitted verbally, and it has to be memorized, and it must be passed on. With the written, I don't have to know the entire history of the Greeks, because I can consult the book whenever I want. So now I'm free to do other things that perhaps would have been considered frivolous, time consuming, and not in line with the required goal of making certain that history moved forward. So I think that, written gives us that. It frees us up to, technically slightly more frivolous things, but it's not that they're frivolous. Now they become paths towards increased individuality, because we can think for ourselves. We don't have to be so fiercely in the collective mindset. And it's the idea of, we talk about that here with, comprehensivity breeds a stronger ability to problem solve, because there's more diverse tool set, right? And I think that that's something that we get specifically from the ability to write things down that we didn't have before.
Excellent point. I want to add one thing there. The thing is, if you're depending on oral conversation to preserve your culture and transmit it, the flip side of it is that you have to just talk about those things. You cannot really modify them. Like if you're remembering Rigveda by reciting the whole thing, and it is important, it contains important information. The only way you're going to hold it is in your head. You can't question things. You can't say which part of it is correct. Can I put it on it's going to mess up your memory completely. Whereas just writing allows you to transform things. The oral allows you to hold on to a particular culture, but it doesn't allow you to go across cultures. If you want to say, are there different ways of doing this? And what if I combine these with that? What would it be like? Even, kind of thinking of all of this on a massive scale is enabled by writing. So you are a citizen of the world, and you're a citizen of time. So you can go to any time and any world, and it's all yours. And you can have, what Mortimer Adler calls the great conversation. You're having great conversation with everybody, and you're inviting them in. And only writing makes that possible. Because otherwise you are limited by people who happen to be around you, by proximity, and by all kinds of accidents of history. Suddenly writing and printing opens the whole history and the whole world to you. Next up is Jen.
Yeah, so actually, what Mike earlier said actually remind me something about graphic. We were talking about writing, but not too much about graphic, because a picture worth 1,000 words. I personally experience that a lot when I'm doing design. Like my client, most of them are computer engineers. They send this long email of comments. I'm like, sorry, I don't have time to read through all your email. Why don't you just mark on the drawing? You can use like 2 sentences with a simple red mark. Explain so much better. So I think, graphic and writing, they both writing away is so different. And I personally think the difference between them is one is more the, writing is good with describing the abstract, the thought. Then the graphic, I think, is better to represent the physical world. So that's why, when you see a novel, when you read a novel, you can imagine all these things in your mind. When you see a movie, sometimes, oh no, it's not supposed to be like this, because you have different understanding of the novel supposed to be. And I also wonder, we're talking about, oral and print, but today most of kids learn everything from YouTube. Like my kids learn everything from YouTube, not from books. Maybe if they want to get deeper, they do. There's new things, people learn things. And also when I'm actually trying to learn more about Louis Kahn, and I found it, I have his book, but when I watch it on YouTube, it have all this, the way he's speaking it, the way he presenting it, have so much richer than just read his book. I think once you have that, then you read book, and maybe it's different. I think it's, in the end, all these things will have to be, like Bill mentioned, have to mix up in a way. Like, I think the advantage of book is so flexible, and you can refer to anything so fast. If you watch a video, like, oh, what did he say earlier? Then it's so hard to find the point. But on the paper, it's just so easy. Like, if you want to abstract things, or you want to reference something, it's much faster way to do it versus video or or recording. So just think they're just very interesting. I think more about what's the difference between all these different type of media.
Yeah, excellent points. And the point that you raised, which was not raised before, is the relative use of writing and diagrams. I'm a big fan of diagrams because I don't know how to actually process really complex things without drawing. So drawing with just few words or something like that captures like a structure to me much better than just writing. And partly I think there are individual differences in that, and partly there are objective things. So that entire field, both of which are kind of applications of paper, pen and paper, or pencil and paper, but they engage different parts of our brain, the right brain versus left brain, of kind of a overall picture versus a sequence. And it's all, this is really, really interesting. So, I think we're just looking at a, vignette of this great field. And I'm really, really honored, and I'm always very grateful to be able to do this For me, the biggest example was Tao Te Ching, because when we went through Tao Te Ching, I really liked Tao Te Ching, and I prepared for it as best as I could. We would be reading this verse, and I would read like 12 different translations and think about it and do all of it. It's a short verse, right? But it's very deep. And I would do all that work, and then I would go in to the meetup on Tao Te Ching. And then what you would have is you would have all these people engaging with the material. Firstly, they would read their favorite verses. Okay, now what the reading does, as Maritza's poetry group will show, is that the reader is actually expressing their understanding of the material through their reading itself. And that itself was very amazing. And then so maybe 15 people would read different versions, their favorite versions. The emphasis would be there. And then, of course, Jason and Amon would come and they would go character by character. So you're now going into the root language, and you're able to look at the various choices that various translators have made from these characters, and you learn to respect that original language and its way of expression, which is different from the alphabet that we have. Then you would have the discussions, and invariably you would find that people are bringing up things you had never thought of, though you spend all this time on it. So we're talking about a piece of writing about this long. Okay, and then you would have like a 2-hour envelope of discussion on that. And it would increase the richness. Now, not all writing is like that. Okay, there is writing which probably should not be read even once. Okay, but there are writings which actually capture such depth and such richness in them that you can have a 2-hour conversation on 16 lines. And you leave feeling, oh, there is more. And next time you come and do that, by the way, good news, Jason and Amon are going to be back doing their second version of the translation of Tao Te Ching, going through the whole Tao Te Ching. But again, see, that is again, is showing the greatness of writing that is possible, what is possible for human beings, and how much is possible through translation and retranslation and discussion and rediscussion of these eternal things, right? I think Robert has unmuted. Robert, would you like to say anything?
Yes, Shrikant. I was very interested in your point that once you get written language, you don't have to remember everything in the oral tradition. You have to repeat everything. I would like to let you hypothesize if Elon Musk gets his way and has Neuralink, where our minds are plugged into the internet, or even at a lower stage where we just have a zip drive or a flash drive in our brain where we just have tons of information. How we could be going to, I'm not advocating for this, but I'm just curious for your thoughts. We could be going to a whole nother level where we don't have to know stuff. We don't even have to know stuff. We're just completely free to create all the time. If we want to know French or German or Arabic, it's just there. How would that change? You talk about the medium as the message. Wouldn't that just have profound, utterly a quantum leap in how we communicate?
Right. Great question. I don't think I have a good answer to that, but I'm going to say a couple of things. So firstly, my base is technology, and I love technology. And I'm very, very optimistic about what it can do for us. But one thing I've learned is that there are things that are human, and those are very deep. There are things that only human beings can do that are profound, and they are at a level, it's like it is at the level of self-consciousness or self-direction. It is at the inner loop of the control loop that is for formulating other things. You can build a lot of richness and you can leverage a lot, but the need for that internal control of making those judgments, making those integrations, there are things that only human beings can do. And if we lose track of what is distinctively human, by getting wrongly focused on what technology has to offer. So technology can flip. This is again using Marshall McLuhan's tetrad. The digital enhances many, 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 many faculties, human faculties. And it does displace many, many human faculties. So you have to look at what is it that it is displacing. You have to also see what it is trying to retrieve, but you also have to watch out for the flip, where you might lose something, lose focus on something, which is distinctively human. So I'm all for, greatness of technology and using it. But I think many of the folks, because human beings are not that well understood, many people lose things that are distinctively human in the process. I don't know. This is not a very good answer, but Robert, that's what I have. What do you think? Any thoughts?
Well, I'm not a super technology optimist, but I like to think about this stuff. That if I had, let's say, instant access to Arabic, just I knew Arabic instantly, I would still be in charge, but now I could research things in Arabic or Turkish or whatever language, and that would give me a new insight on many new things. I could write a song in Turkish, which I currently could not do. So the thought being that I could still be in the driver's seat just with this superpower Wikipedia that I have instant access to.
Now, that's a very good example. So let's just look at that, okay? I think languages are far, far more richer tools than what you could get by this. When you want to do poetry in Arabic, okay, what you would have to do, you basically need to master all the metaphors that were there at the root of the language. You need to know how they are used. You need to know the connotations, not just the denotations, but connotations, and be able to use it. What a chat GPT can produce something that looks human, but it cannot produce something which has this haunting beauty of a verse in Tao Te Ching, where people can focus on it for 2,000 years and there is more to give. That kind of a work, that level of human creativity, I'm just putting that as something that human beings can do. But what I'm saying is that even at a language level, it is not a mechanical translation. You really need to know all the nuances, all of it. You can do something like, the way I would do it is that I like using the technology. So one of my favorite things is this Google Translate app, where you can just bring up anything, any written material in any language, just point to it, and you can see what it is. You don't even have to type it. You can just point your camera to it and you can read what it is. But you have to realize that it is not 100%. It is like 80%. And if you're going to express kind of the deepest of thoughts, it will have imprecisions. It will have the wrong connotations. It's the connotations that you would miss. It's the context of the entire culture. I mean, that's the Geertz point, right? Geertz would say that you can't bring, you will lose. That is also Walter Ong's point. He says, text is all pretext. The text of this kind would be like far greater pretext than what a text normally is. So what you would be losing is the context. You would have the appearance of having efficacy in language, but you would be losing the grandeur, the richness of it. You can do certain things with it. You can certainly, navigate your way in a city. You can check what the weather is. You can look at the popular headlines. There are some things that you can do, but that's not all that what a language is. All right. Anybody else wants to comment on this? You're welcome to do that. What is it that computers can do? And what is it that computers can't do? Is there a limit? Do we know anything about it? Maritza, go ahead.
I will chime in here. It's that human element. It's the emotion. So, it makes me think of dancing. So Spanish dancing, specifically salsa, has gotten so much more popular here in the United States over the last 20, 25 years. And you've seen people who are not born into a culture where, this salsa dancing is with them from childhood. They go to the classes and they become technically proficient and they look beautiful dancing on the dance floor. They're perfect, but they don't have the mess that comes with the emotional aspect of feeling the music. So, I tell people I learned how to dance salsa in the kitchen with my mother while also learning how to cook. And I believe that difference, that distinction, it can't be taught. You can't learn how to feel music. You can learn all the steps and you can look beautiful, but unless you somehow find a way, that human connection of feeling it, there's going to be something missing. Like you were just saying, like that, it's not going to have it's never going to evoke longing, or it's never going to evoke wistfulness. It cannot touch the humanity in others because it's missing that. And I think that none of us on this Zoom will live to see any technology that can touch that. I am not entirely convinced that any technology shall be able to touch that. I'll suspend my disbelief, but if it is, it's so very far in the future that it's not something for us that we'll have to worry about.
Thank you. Thank you, Maritza. All right, folks, this has been a great meetup. Let's see what's coming up. On Friday, we are going to do Hamlet. Phil is leading that. On Saturday, we have Louis Sullivan, and I think Jason is doing a meetup on the Tao. So check that out. That's going to be at, I think, 5 p.m. Louis Sullivan is at 2 p.m. And then Monday is going to be poetry. Tuesday is going to be Confucius. Confucius is winding down or taking a break. It is once the 15th chapter is finished, Jason and Amon are going to restart the Tao, go through the entire of Tao Te Ching, and then continue after that with Confucius. So I'm very excited about it. I love the Tao. So that's coming up. And next Wednesday, we're going to have Sanjay back talking about neuroscience. All right. And Thursday is going to be the power of myth. So that's what is coming up. Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. All right, folks. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Night.